Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tico, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Dana Schwartz's new book, Anatomy, A Love Story, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bast on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor. Now run by third-generation owner, Nancy Bass-Whiten. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors, such as Dana and Jennifer, we wouldn't be here today. We are thrilled to have Dana Schwartz with us for a discussion of her new book, Anatomy, A Love Story. Dana Schwartz is a television writer and the creator of the #1 charting history podcast, Noble Blood. As a journalist and critic, has written for Entertainment Weekly, The New Yorker, Marie Claire, Glamour, GQ, Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, and more. She now lives in Los Angeles with her cat Beetlejuice. Her books include Choose Your Own Disaster, The White Man's Guide to the White Male Writers of the Western Canon, and Anatomy, A Love Story. Joining Dana in conversation is Jennifer Wright. Jennifer Wright is an author of history books, television writer, columnist, podcaster, and speaker. Her books include the new She Kills Me, and upcoming Behold the Triumph of Virtue, as well as It Ended Badly, 13 of the Worst Breakups in History, the Audible bestseller Get Well Soon, History's Worst Plagues, and the Heroes That Fought Them, and We Came First, romantic advice from women who have been there. So without further ado, please help me in joining Dana and Jennifer to the stage.
Hello.
It is so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. It's so good to see anybody's face during
Yeah, that's it, mostly.
Yeah, which is very appropriate for this book. And I just want to start off by talking about how much I love Anatomy, a Love Story. It's got it all. It's got juicy historical medical details. It's got gothic romance. It's got a ball. It's got a horse named Beetlejuice.
That was a very important little Easter egg.
I feel like that was a personal choice. Yeah.
And this is now becoming a mutual admiration society because your book, especially, I mean, all of your books are just brilliant and smart and make history fun and accessible, which is everything I'm trying to do. But especially your book, Get Well Soon, which is about historical plagues and pandemics, was a particular inspiration for this book. And I both read the physical copy and listened to the audiobook just to make sure I didn't miss any nuances.
Is the audiobook good? Because I've never listened to it because it's weird to hear your book read by someone who isn't you.
It's great. I will say though, it is weird because when I'm reading the physical book, I like hear it in your voice. And then it's someone who's not you, which is interesting.
I know, it's weird for me too, but this is great because one of the things that I loved about the book was how much research you've clearly done on it. And there are great details like the creation of chloroform or things like going off and taking a rest cure because you're afraid of bad air.
Yeah.
Wondering what your favorite historical medical tidbit that you found in your research was.
So there are two like specific details that I put in the book just because I read them and they were so visceral, but they're real. One, the belief that this was back when people's teeth were falling out right and left because they hadn't put fluoride in toothpaste yet. And rich people, when they didn't want dentures, which they could get from dead people or enslaved people or animals or bone or ivory, they wanted, doctors at the time thought that if you pulled a tooth directly out of the mouth of a poor person and then put it in your mouth, that it would like, the tooth still had some life in it or whatever, that it would stick better into your mouth, that it didn't need to be like a denture glued in. That is not, there's no scientific basis for that. But for a long time, people bought that. And so there's a scene in the book where that happens just because that's so visceral as like a metaphor also about like the class system. So that's a pretty gross tidbit. And then I really did love the detail about how body snatchers would strip off all the clothes and the jewelry of the people the bodies that they dug up, because the charge for grave robbing was way more severe than the charge for body snatching, which, in theory probably shouldn't be the case because, bodies should be more precious than objects, but I guess whatever deters people from desecrating resting places.
I guess the idea would be that the family could go back and like the body wouldn't be there, but your rings would still be there. So that's kind of
nice
for the family who's like, father's corpse has been robbed.
And at least the corpse is going to a doctor. It's not going to waste. It's going to science.
No, it's going to science.
You're involuntarily donating your body to science.
And okay, I also love the character of Dr. Beecham. I don't want to reveal anything about what happens with him, but I was wondering if he was based on any historical figures that you had come across.
A few. So his life is sort of similar to an actual surgeon named Robert Liston, who we both read a wonderful book called The Butchering Art that goes into that. And so I sort of based a little bit on what the experience of a young surgeon would be on the life of Robert Liston, just thinking like, okay, what would it have been like? But I also kind of wanted him to be like a man out of time. I did a lot of like, as you know, like a lot of research for this book, historical research, but unlike you and your incredibly well-researched historical books, there were opportunities for me to decide what I did and didn't want to be accurate with. So he invents chloroform about 40 years before it existed.
It's Ethereum, I know.
Yeah, it's and there's a few other little tidbits that he sort of brings in anachronistically, because there's a few little anachronisms in there, because this is a universe in which someone like him exists and is bolstering forward scientific progress a little faster. So it was kind of fun for me to sort of put all of my I feel like the literary canon is littered with mentor figures who maybe aren't quite as smart as they seem, like a Dumbledore type. And now I feel like
constantly getting children killed. Like Dumbledore shouldn't be allowed to run a school.
No, worse.
All the children should be pulled out of Hogwarts.
When you remember that, I know everyone's going to be like, read another book, but remember, when you go back and read and be like, these 12-year-olds were the ones in charge of these things.
Oh yeah, no, I have a child now. I would simply withdraw them from that school immediately. Like one child would die, and I'd be like, "We're homeschooling you now. Good talk. You can."
You're a mother. Children are dying every year at this school. But yeah, so I feel like I was basing him also on the literary tradition of a mentor who then the student has to realize I have to maybe look at this person slightly critically, because when you meet someone that you're kind of in awe of, you don't have a critical eye. And then I think it's a sign of growing up when you're able to be like, okay, I agree with you on some things and maybe don't agree with you on other things.
I think it's also wonderful that it's coming from a younger female student, because I think that's something when you are a young woman that can really happen to you when you meet a man who has professional accomplishments in a field that you admire.
And also, oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, I know that's something that you've explored a little bit weirdly with a guy in your MFA, and the idea of being awed by these men who seem to have impressive knowledge about I don't know, Jonathan Franzen. And then you grow up and realize they weren't that smart. These
everyone is faking it all the time. I think with Hazel is the protagonist of the book. She is someone who's been very lonely and isolated her entire life, and that gives her certain delusions, but it also leaves her she has this weird combination of being incredibly independent but also incredibly naive in certain respects. And so someone like Beecham, who's incredibly accomplished, seeing her and being I see something amazing in you, and there's no, I mean, this isn't a spoiler, but there's no sexual interest or no creepy interest, just a genuine I see your brain and you're really smart. And that's a really powerful thing, I think, for every young person to have. And then it's sort of challenging if that person doesn't live up to all of your expectations.
I actually thought it was, and I don't think this is a spoiler, at the end I thought it was really touching that he was just I thought we'd be friends.
Yeah, he really likes her. He likes her.
Be friends, yeah.
He was I think I also, this is so hard because I'm I don't want to spoil anything, but I never want to write characters who are all good or all bad. Even someone like Dr. Strand, who is introduced sort of as the slightly more sinister doctor, a little more closed off, a little more sexist, a little more old-fashioned. At least in my brain, he's someone who had to work his way up from nothing. And so he's sort of resentful of someone like Hazel, who is the niece of a lord and is just sort of prancing through life thinking why not me? I can do anything. And it's he sort of was like, I had to scrape my way up. I am not wasting an ounce of energy or time on someone who's frivolous, or what he deems to be frivolous, where it's like, to some degree, I kind of get it. Like, I would never write someone I fully disagree with.
Yeah, no, I think his point of like, you're a woman, you're never going to be a professional doctor, I'm not wasting my time training you, that's a valid point. I don't love it, but
it's a little 1800s.
It's a little 1800s for me.
Yeah. It's sort of like the equivalent today of when people are like, well, she's just going to get pregnant anyway. Why should we give her a job?
Yeah. Speaking of things that are vaguely relevant today, a lot of this book deals with the idea of this Roman plague that's sweeping through Edinburgh, and you were writing it during a time of plague. Is there anything about COVID that inspired this? Did it make you feel like maybe people should be responding to COVID better because we've had 200 years to try to improve our responses?
Yeah, the wild thing is I began writing this book in 2019, before people knew what COVID was. And there was just a plague in the past, because I wanted there to be, I knew that Hazel's older brother had to die, which is why she had a lot of pressure on her. And I knew that I wanted there to be this like specter of death, so that deaths were being written off as less, so that's like, oh, as a cover for like, because I'm like, oh, it's going to be a murder mystery. But oh boy, then a whole pandemic happened. It's not just a 19th century concern, it turns out. I will say I made a change to the book because of it. I originally had a character who like made his living and was famous, because I can tell you, originally Dr. Beecham was like acclaimed because he had cured the Roman fever. And then we discovered that it's not quite a cure, that there's like a pretty severe side effect, and no one really cares because it's like, well, it's poor people dying. And then I took that out and changed it because I didn't want people thinking I was writing like a sneaky anti-doctor, anti-vaccine prank. I didn't want anyone being like, see, read through the lines, she's saying doctors.
Oh yeah, no, they're all just corrupt murderers trying to
throw us under the bus. I'm going to throw this right back at you and saying, did you learn anything writing your book, Get Well Soon, that made you feel prepared for COVID in any way?
I mean, okay, everybody handled it worse than I ever could have possibly imagined. Like I genuinely, I write in my book, Get Well Soon, that, I think we've learned lessons from the past. I think we've learned that you have to be incredibly compassionate to whatever portion of the community is suffering from a disease. You really have to listen to medical expertise. Vaccines are a lifesaver. So those are kind of the main takeaways of my book. And I remember when COVID was starting, this sounds kind of bad, but I thought, thank God it's straight white people. Like, thank God you can't do the thing that we did during AIDS. You can't do the thing that we've done in the past where we decide like, oh, these people are morally corrupt or they're sinners. Like, it's grandma and grandpa. Nobody wants grandma and grandpa to die. What I did not expect was the editorials of like, let grandma and grandpa die. I want to go to a Denny's.
Let them die. I'm not wearing a mask.
Oh God, I know. I did not expect the sheer levels of self-absorption, just the unwillingness to suffer any minor discomfort to keep people alive.
I will say, I have a podcast called Noble Blood where I do stories from history, and I did an episode about Catherine the Great, and I remember reading about her. And Catherine the Great, famously, when there was a smallpox epidemic, she became truly one of the first people in all of Russia. She set the trend back when it was like kind of scandalous of vaccines weren't even a thing yet. They were just inoculations. And so they were still like kind of risky. And she and her eldest son, her heir, were inoculated against smallpox publicly as a symbol to the country to be like, do this. And so it became very popular in noble court to get inoculated because the queen and prince did. And I was almost depressing to read that and be like, wow, we're more backwards than the 1700s. Like, we're dealing, in some ways.
The problem you have so much more information, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, I think it is easier if you have been trained from birth that like Catherine the Great is God's appointed heir.
Yeah.
God is working through her. She's the mother of our country. She is vaccinated. I fully believe what this lady is telling me to do.
Yeah.
Then it's a little bit easier to fall in line. And, I think especially in America, we have there's this line in Oklahoma that I always think sums up America better than anything else I've ever heard. Where one of the characters sings, "I'm not saying I'm no better than anybody else, but I'll be damned if I'm not just as good." And that's great when you want to like go out and get an education, and that's very bad when you decide you're as smart as every doctor in America
That's
because
it.
you read the
That's well
internet and
said.
you were just as smart.
You're just
Yeah.
as smart as everyone else.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good for your self-esteem, bad for keeping your fellow man alive during times of plague. So yeah. Sweeping back to that, tell me about how you decided to set this in Edinburgh, because there are a lot of cities. I know Paris around this time was also considered really at the forefront of medicine, but talk to me about Edinburgh.
There's two reasons. One, I love Edinburgh. I first went right after I graduated college with a friend from high school, and we both were like, all right, let's postpone the real world and just see as many European cities as we can by staying in hostels while we're still 22. And I remember we had done like Ireland and London, and then we were just arriving to Edinburgh because we were working our way west to east. And when we arrived in Edinburgh, it was like the sun literally and metaphorically peeked through the clouds. It felt like a fairy tale city. We just had an amazing few days there exploring. It was like the perfect combination of like a modern, fun city, but also with like incredible history and architecture. It feels like a gothic city. There's these like winding cobblestone streets. It's like a little spooky, but small and pretty walkable and contained compared to a country that's crazy like London, crazy big, and like a gorgeous green mountain overlooking it, Arthur's Seat. So I fell in love with Edinburgh as a city. I guess there's 3 reasons. So that's one. And I felt like I could know it pretty well because it's pretty small, especially the old town. And then 2, I was really inspired by the story of Burke and Hare, who were 2 men.
I wanted to talk to you about Burke and Hare.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Burke and Hare, as Jennifer knows, were 2 men during this era of resurrection men. And they decided that rather than do the busy work of avoiding night guards and police and digging up dead bodies, they would just murder people who stayed at the inn they were at and give those to a doctor. And they did and got away with it for a little while and then got caught and hanged. One got hanged because one turned on the other. And so that was sort of not directly, but a tone of the story, a tone of history that inspired this. And that took place in Edinburgh. And Edinburgh is also where like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is. It's like a very like spooky gothic city. And then I got a writing fellowship at a real place called Hawthornden Castle, which is also where I set this book, which is a real castle north of Edinburgh that was inherited by a rich lady who was heiress to the Heinz ketchup fortune. Her name is Joella Heinz, and she married a Scottish lord and turned this castle into a writer's retreat. And she just paid for writers.
Just leading my dream life. What a great thing to do.
Imagine being a ketchup heiress and then giving it to writers. So I stayed for a month in Edinburgh, and that was when I started writing this book. And so I knew Hawthornden Castle, and like that's where I made Hazel live because why not? And I could go to the city and like walk around. And so it was just like, this was always an Edinburgh book, even if I didn't know it always.
And I love how gothic this book is. And I was wondering what other writers helped inspire that, in addition to the ones who, provided information about medicine at the time. I get so many Mary Shelley vibes off of this book.
I mean, this was really inspired. It truly was inspired, honestly, by a cover of I have several versions of Frankenstein because I love Frankenstein. I've loved it since I was in high school. And And I just saw one of the covers has a spindly like line drawing of like a Frankenstein as a grave robber. And that really inspired me because I was like, Jack, that's him.
Yeah.
So definitely Frankenstein. And some of the slightly more macabre horror imagery at the end of the book is explicitly Frankenstein. So I really wanted this to feel Frankenstein-y. I wanted it to feel a little Crimson Peak, the Guillermo del Toro movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That movie's a mess, but it's a fun one.
It's a huge mess.
Yeah.
My favorite part of this movie is like they say if two people are truly in love, they can waltz around the room holding a candle and the candle will never go out. And first of all, that's such a crazy test. And second of all, when they waltz, the candle goes out like 4 times.
Yeah.
It's very clear when they have to restart the film.
Yeah. They could have CGI'd that candle.
Oh, yeah, they could have just kept that candle going for them.
That movie is a full mess, but you have to admit, amazing vibes, just impeccable vibes the entire time.
Just all the outfits in it, just the outfits of wandering around a creepy castle.
Exactly. The plot doesn't make sense. The ghosts don't make sense. None of it makes sense.
You're trying to make a machine that pulls up mud?
He's trying to make a mud machine. The ghosts aren't evil, we learn. They're just there. But if you lifted the ghosts out of the story, the movie is exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
They don't serve any purpose. But so that's it. Like spooky gothic vibes. Sarah Waters, who's a writer who wrote this book called Fingersmith, which is amazing. Yeah. It was adapted into a South Korean film called The Handmaiden, which is very different.
We read that for our book club. I remember that.
We did. Isn't that great? It was a really great book.
Yeah, it was really good. I really enjoyed it.
So I think that book sort of like inspired the creepy macabre castle vibes. Yeah, I like weird ghost stories. I read Ninth House while I was writing this, which is a pretty like, there's like the trend in publishing that you probably like of dark academia, which is like very like, I read The Secret History and Wes Anderson movies, and now I wear a blazer. But
and have to kill one farmer.
Yeah.
That's the rule.
It's very important. Just one.
Yeah.
So I wanted sort of that, but set in a crumbling, lonely castle with dead bodies.
And I know that we have to switch over in like 10 minutes, so I feel like I am running through questions now. But
let's do it. Lightning round.
Yeah, this is a departure from a lot of your work up until this point. And I guess for me, when I read anything by Dana Schwartz, I think, oh, this is going to be really funny.
Yeah.
And there are funny parts to this book. I don't think you can not be funny. I think that is built into who you are and how you write. And thank God. But was it difficult to transition from the style of writing that you do so much of the time to doing this?
You know, the weird thing is I sort of got noticed as a writer on Twitter. And I didn't think I would ever be a writer professionally. Like I just didn't know how or when. So I felt like even though I never was a comedian or ever really thought I was going to be a comedian, I think because I sort of got noticed and came up through Twitter, I sort of just like a salmon, went with the current, with the flow, the opposite of what a salmon does, I guess, and just sort of like went into the comedy writing vein, which was just sort of, it felt like the pipeline of like the things that I like to do. But I was like really young. And so I was very lucky that I got these big opportunities early on, but I was still young. And I don't think I knew how to I didn't know how to say no to anything, by the way. I just wanted any opportunity. I was like, oh my God, writing. Yes, of course. But I didn't know who I was or what type of writer I wanted to be. And I didn't have the confidence really to figure it out quietly on my own. I just wanted to get noticed and, get validation however I could. So I sort of had to course correct in semi-public view. I was lucky enough to be able to do this podcast called Noble Blood, produced by Aaron Mahnke, which is sort of similar to Anatomy in that it's earnest and well-researched. And it was kind of scary to do something earnest because you don't have you can't hide behind irony or self-deprecation. I wrote this book and I have to tell people hi, I worked really hard on it. It's a real story. I hope you enjoy it. There's no, there's no shield. It's weirdly, I wrote like a memoir about my life and like described like eating disorders and sexual experiences. And in a weird way, this feels way more vulnerable to me because it's not jokey or self-deprecating. It's like fully unironic of just like, this is the type of story that I think is interesting and fun.
And everybody else does as well. Reese Witherspoon clearly does.
So God, I'm still like shaking.
Which, by the way, that's so cool. I love Reese.
Coolest. I feel like
please let her know that I love her.
Oh, I mean, yes, I would love to one day. Yeah. Sorry, I realize that answer also is very vulnerable. And so like, I apologize if my cool facade has fallen. People who think I'm very cool.
I mean, it's a love story. Like,
yeah. It's about teenagers. Teenagers are the most earnest people in the world.
They are, yeah. Oh God. There's John Hughes quote, I think in The Breakfast Club, where they say, when you grow up, your heart dies. And I always think, yes, and thank God, because if I cared as much about everything as I did when I was 15, I would not be a functional human being.
I think I've got upset sometimes because I wonder if anything will ever make me feel as much as I felt being 14 and seeing Spring Awakening.
Oh my God. I saw Spring Awakening when I was a teenager too. It was very good. And it really taps into those teenage feelings.
Yeah, it really does. So that is the thing I tried to tap into with Anatomy is like everything is a little more when you're a teenager.
Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, it's a story told between two characters. You have Jack, who's a grave robber, and Hazel, who is a woman and an aspiring surgeon. Did one of those characters come to you first, or yes, go on. Yes.
Oh, I knew that he would be a grave robber, but I didn't know anything else about him. And it was sort of like the Romeo / Tony from West Side Story problem, where it's just like, a boy's there, but he's just a blank void. And you don't know who he is, and the girl is interesting. So I knew Hazel first, and I was sort of plotting this out in my brain, and I realized that there was a lot of her I needed to get through before they even met, because they don't meet until like pretty far in the book, or have at least like a sizable interaction. And I sort of realized that, and I was like, oh, well, I better give this book a little bit more Jack to make it a little more even. And so I sort of got to know him as I was writing. So I always knew it would be a female surgeon and a grave robber, but I knew her personality much faster because the men in everything are always much more boring.
Well, I mean, I think Jack's interesting. I liked Jack. He seemed he was a nice person. He has, a side job working at a theater.
Which is, again, just me trying to shoehorn in everything, every scene where I'm like, oh, where do I want to spend time? A graveyard, a ball, a spooky theater, a ballet, everything I just put in this book. That's my earnest heart.
A graveyard at night. It really is like a best of everything you could read about in a Gothic novel.
Thank you. It's a Dana's Gothic novel vomit onto the page of places I want.
Is there any talk already of turning this into a TV show or a movie? Because it seems like it would transition very naturally.
I hope so. I mean, I don't.
Me too.
If anybody, one day, I hope I'll write it. I've written for TV.
And, again, I'm not sure how much time we have left. I think I have 4 minutes. What are you planning on doing next? Are you thinking of another novel? What's coming up for you?
There's going to be an Anatomy sequel.
I'm so happy.
A continuation of the story. Okay. What's going to happen? I haven't, written it yet in the way that books are typically fully written. But I do know that Hazel is going to go down to London, and we're going to get a change of scenery, and we might meet someone who canonically would be dead at this point, Princess Charlotte, but in this universe is not dead because maybe she has a great doctor treating her.
Tell me why Princess Charlotte.
She was sort of this beloved princess in England. She was next in line to be queen. If she lived Queen Victoria would not have been queen. She was like the next in line. It was her, and she died tragically very young at 21. And they say it was like all of London like wept. Like Lord Byron wrote sad poems about her and lamented. She was engaged to a Prince of Belgium who was like heartbroken. And she's a very interesting, like now kind of a historical footnote because she didn't reach the points that she did. But that's fun for me to be like, well, I'm going to write historical fan fiction.
I think that's nice. And I think that gives you more freedom than it does with someone like Queen Victoria, who would have really appreciated Ethereum, was just so happy when she could get chloroformed when giving birth.
Oh my God. For children 8 and 9, she was just like,
Jesus. Yeah, Queen Victoria is one of my favorite bad moms in history. One who just truly despised having children, like talked about how much she hated being pregnant, talked about how boring her children were. Really, because nobody would tell her about birth control in any form. And she tried to figure it out. She asked people about it. And everybody was like, well, there's nothing you can do. So she was in this terrible position where she really liked fucking her husband every single day. And nobody would give her even the vaguest advice about contraception. So
heartbreaking.
No, so sad for her. Condoms were readily available by 1850. Like they could have really kept it at like 3 airs in that house.
Yeah. Air, spare.
Exactly. Done. Yeah.
She was so tiny. Poor woman.
Yeah, I know. She did not care for that. But I'm sorry, we should turn
we should do questions. I hope they're between
Victoria as well. But yeah, I'm glad we can focus on Queen Victoria. I love this book. Everybody should buy this book. I will turn it over to our questions now. So I'm going to mute myself.
Hi, so we do have a couple of questions. There is a couple that in regards for Dana, why did you choose to make this a YA book rather than adult fiction?
That is a great question. And it's actually a question that I had this story in my brain. Like I knew I wanted to write about turn of the 19th century. Is it what century is turning of the 19th century? Early 1800 surgery. And I did think, like, do I want this to be an adult novel or a young adult novel? And I think the main factor of why I wanted it to be young adult fiction, and it really didn't change like my writing style or really any of the plot, but I just realized that thematically, the structure of the book was here is a young woman figuring out her purpose in life or the thing that she wants to do for the rest of her life. She's truly finding her passion and realizing that there are challenges to achieving her goals that she didn't anticipate, that sometimes interest isn't enough to these bigger issues. And this is also a period in her life where she sort of has her first crush. I think Hazel is a very pragmatic character, and she sort of realized like, it's 1817, marriages are convenient. I have this cousin who's ready to go. That's how these things work. Done, check. And then it sort of disrupts her plan when she finds someone that she has, banter with and chemistry with. And so both of those issues, like the idea of coming into your career and your purpose, and then your sort of first romantic experience, are both things that young adults particularly go through or feel more strongly. Like that tends to be the issues that 17-year-olds go through. And so that's why I was like, oh, this feels like a young adult book. Even though, I hope the writing makes it interesting and accessible also for adults. I think that also nowadays that line is less arbitrary. I think or more arbitrary rather. I think like a lot of adults read young adult fiction. And so I hope that by making it young adults feel comfortable and confident reading it, knowing that there's going to be nothing like wildly inappropriate. But I hope it doesn't preclude adults from reading and enjoying it.
And in transition from to adult fiction, Paulina asked, would you make an adult fiction version of Anatomy or something similar to it?
Oh, no, I think it is. I mean, if you're an adult, it sort of is an adult. I don't know what I would change. I mean, it's about a young woman, but I think that it's still, ready to be enjoyed by an adult.
And we have here from Anonymous, excuse me. Hi, Dana. Did any of the people you covered on your podcast influence any of the characters in Anatomy?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say no one directly, but because I got a lot of like historic reps writing episodes of Anatomy, like episodes of Noble Blood in like the 1800s, I felt way more comfortable and confident writing about a historical time period than I otherwise would have. I think like if I hadn't written, hundreds of thousands of words that took place in the past, I would have been a lot more nervous. But I think if Noble Blood has taught me one thing, it's that throughout history, people have been basically the same. They've been jealous, they've been petty, they've been ambitious, smart, snarky, in love, in hate. And so that's my big takeaway from Noble Blood is like people aren't fundamentally different because they existed in the past.
In terms and talking about Noble Blood, Cecily asks, would you adapt Noble Blood into a book?
I am currently working on one. There is a Noble Blood book coming out one day, but I'm working on it. It's coming. It's not episode scripts. It's basically a book exploring our collective fixation on royalty throughout history, especially Americans. I feel like Americans have this weird idea about and love about royalty. For a country that claims to be so egalitarian, we do love holding on to entrenched social structures.
And then we have here, from Lila, this is a different topic. She said, I love the cover of the book. Did you choose the cover design and also the font as well?
Oh, I got so lucky. Jennifer knows, like being an author, you have to give up so much control when it comes to the cover of your book. You really like are hands up, like at your publisher's mercy. But I got so lucky. This was the first design they showed me. We adjusted the colors a little bit, but I thought the design was amazing. I mean, it's so eye-catching. It was beautiful. Some people see the woman first, some people see the anatomical heart first. It's an amazing design, illustrator, designer, and Zachary Myers, who did the actual illustration, and then the Great Wednesday publishing team did it. So I didn't choose it. I just got very, very lucky and told them, like, if I really hated it, I'm sure I could have been like, please, anything but that. But no, I was at their mercy and they really nailed it.
Yeah, it's a really great cover. It's so beautiful.
And if you have a hardcover, look on the inside, there's an embossed anatomical heart. I'm like obsessed with it. I think it's the coolest thing I've ever seen on a book.
We have here, Dana, is there another period in history in which you like to adapt in fiction?
I have like a wild fixation on Marie Antoinette for some reason. I just can't get her out of my head. I've loved her since I was, a teenager, and I read, the Antonia Fraser the first time and then saw the Sofia Coppola movie. I think the French Revolution is very exciting to me and has always been intimidating to me, but I would love to be there someday. Yeah. It's not, I realize that that's not a huge change from Anatomy. It's just like, 30 years earlier, but yeah, like pre-revolutionary France, I think would be very fun for me.
And this is for both of you, since you both talk about history a lot in your books. Who are your favorite figures just in general in history?
Okay, do you want to go one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna say Lord Byron, not because I like him as a person, because I don't think he's a good person, but he's a bad person, some would say. But I love someone who lives that balls to the wall constantly. He is unapologetically an egomaniac who's obsessed with himself and obsessed with having sex and making bad choices. And as someone who is terrified of what everyone thinks of me at every moment. There's something wildly compelling about that to me, of someone who like his insecurity took him in the opposite direction.
Okay, bouncing off Lord Byron, I'm gonna say Carol Lamb, one of Lord Byron's lovers, who had a short-lived relationship with Lord Byron. And she did not take it ending lightly at all. She chopped off all her pubic hair. She sent it to him in the mail. She asked for his pubic hair back. She burned him in effigy, where she made her servants dance around the burning effigy and read poems about how much she hated Lord Byron. She kind of, and then she wrote a book. Then she wrote a book about how much she hated Lord Byron and how he was a bad person, which, look, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Can I say though, that is such a relatable impulse when someone dumps you and doesn't, and you want more attention. You're just not done yet. Like this nowadays, it would be like subtweeting, it would be like stalking their Instagram story. It's like that thing you do of trying to poke them and get their attention back. Like she went way too far, but this is, I totally understand.
Oh no, I think I love Carolyn Lamb because I think it is the natural extension of feelings that you have when you are a young person and you're broken up with and want to text your ex 27 times. Except obviously that was impossible. So she just had to chop off all her pubic hair and send it.
If only she could quadruple text Byron.
Oh my God.
And be like, is this bad? Did I do too much?
Yeah, no, she also, like, what's interesting about that period, and it's something I was reading about, I'm currently writing a book about Madame Restell, who I should have said was my favorite figure. She was one of the first independent female millionaires in America in the 1850s, and she was an abortionist. So my next book, which is tentatively called Behold the Triumph of Virtue, but it won't actually be called that, is about Madame Restell. And one of the weird things I found was that George Washington used to station a slave outside of his estate and just invite in anyone who was coming by because they had no company. There were so many people in like Revolutionary era America that lived like 18 miles away from someone on like these large estates, but they had no friends. And obviously it was a little bit better in England because you had these social centers. But there's this great account of like a man going to visit this young married couple and the woman bursting into tears because she hasn't seen somebody who's not a member of her family in a year. And she's just so excited to talk to a person who doesn't live in their house. So yeah, if you don't have the friends to tell you like, maybe put your phone away when you've been drinking so you don't text him maybe, then yeah, those feelings can really spiral wildly out of control the way they did for Carol Lamb.
That's a great answer.
We have here, it was a continuation from your Queen Victoria conversation. They asked if Queen Victoria had access to condoms, do you think it would have prevented World War One?
I wish I know who asked that question. I don't know, Newt Gingrich. She's probably going to write a book about that now, but
yeah, I'm going to say yes because the Kaiser was whose son. Now I have to look up whose son the Kaiser was. I'm so sorry. I feel like embarrassed that I'm missing my history, but like, actually, no, you know what? It wouldn't, because the Kaiser's mother was her oldest daughter, Victoria, her first child. So she would have had her first child anyway, and she would have had Kaiser Wilhelm.
Okay, but counterpoint. The more children Queen Victoria had, the more disengaged from maternal life she became. She hated having her first child. She didn't want to have more. And Queen Victoria was very candid with her friends about like, I don't like children. I don't like being around these children. Personally, like I have one child right now. I very much wanted to be a mother. I love her more than anything in the world. She's a perfect angel. I think my stress levels would go up enormously if I had a second child. Like I am able to love my daughter so much because I have one child. I think with every additional child you have, your attention gets spread thinner and thinner. It just gets a little harder to keep all the balls of parenthood in the air. And some people really thrive on that. But as Queen Victoria was someone who was like, I am already not enjoying this, and I am at one. Maybe she had kept it to like 2 children.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been quite so much to balance. You know, children would have gotten older a little bit faster. She wouldn't always have to be focusing on a baby and the problems of just having given birth. And, you know, she would have been in a little bit more of a comfortable and stable place and pass that on to her children.
I don't think that's a bad analysis. Also, I really like the thought of saying if Queen Victoria had access to condoms, it would have prevented World War I, because wild. And maybe, how about this? If she had fewer children, she would have had more love and patience and attention for her grandchildren who started World War I. Maybe she would have been a doting grandmother, and then they would have grown up surrounded by so much love and grandmotherly affection that they would have gotten along so well. And George, Wilhelm, and Nicholas never would have, not Nicholas, was it Nicholas? Never would have fought.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, tentatively, maybe.
I think we fixed history. This is wild.
We did it better.
There was a computer game. I hope we have time to go out on this wild tangent. There was a computer game that my older brother had, that you had to go, you're a spy during World War II. And the goal was you had to go back in time to the Titanic. And while on board the Titanic, before it sinks, you had to uncover certain mysteries to prevent World War I from happening. And I wish one of those subplots was give Queen Victoria condoms. Too late by World War I, by the Titanic, but you know.
That sounds like a really fun game.
This is a real computer game.
We have a question from Jake. How was the transition from New York City to LA? Did that have any impact on the book?
This is actually, that's a wild question, because I'm pretty sure I wrote my pitch of this book, like the 3-paragraph like email to my agent. Like the first time I was like, I have an idea for a book. I want this to be it, on the plane from New York to LA, because it's a long plane ride and I didn't have internet. And so I just wrote down exactly the book that I was really excited about. And I feel like I conceived, like I changed it a lot, but like the first through line of the book on that plane ride. So if nothing else, the move from New York to LA helped me in that respect.
And we have a question. It says, "Hi, Popcorn Book Club fan here. Can you guys do a quick Station 11 episode in 30 seconds?"
Oh my God, oh, it makes me so mad that we can't. I kind of don't like Station 11. I'm the only one. It's
Wait, the TV show or the book?
The TV show, because I love the book so much. And I feel like the TV show obviously made some changes, and that makes sense for television, but it's made so many changes that I feel like they've missed some of the fundamental things that I love about some of the characters. Like maybe just because I'm a Clark fanatic, and Clark is just this beautiful man in the book, just like this lovely man keeping the torch of civilization burning. And seeing him like power tripping in the airport is very disconcerting to me, and I really don't like it.
Yeah, he's very different. It's been so long since I read the book that I'm able to completely divorce the two, I think, to their benefit.
Look, I think the thing I love about the book is, and it truly is, it's my favorite book. I like apocalypse books, but I strongly believe that if there was ever an apocalypse, I should run towards the mushroom cloud, because there's nothing out there for me. Like, I don't like camping. Everything I like is like books or movies or museums or newspapers. And Station 11 is a book that I think is about people like me who love civilization, and they're trying to keep theater going and newspapers going. And so much of it is just stopping off in little towns and finding like one guy who's still running a newspaper. And I love it. It's it gives me a nice reminder of everything I love about the world. And the TV show does not do that. The TV show is like, maybe we all just wander on our own and that's for the best.
Yeah, the book has sort of this like exquisite jewel-like quality of just like the preciousness of humanity and art, and is really about like the reasons we find Shakespeare wonderful throughout history. And I think that I haven't finished the show, nor am I caught up on it, so I can't totally speak confidently because I only watched 3 episodes. But I can say, I think the little girl actress whose name I don't know, is incredible.
She's really, it's a good show. Like, it's a beautiful show.
And one time I interviewed Mackenzie Davis for the New York Observer back when I wrote it for it. And she was maybe the nicest person I've ever interviewed. She was just so kind and like had read, she's like, I heard you were interviewing me. So I like read some of your articles, which like no one does. That's just a nice thing. And she was just like so engaged and thoughtful that I will just root for her no matter what. So everyone, thumbs up to Mackenzie Davis.
The nicest person I ever interviewed was Kelsey Grammer. And I don't know any of his politics, but now I am forced to root for him in everything he does. So
one time I interviewed Kevin Bacon and it was breakfast. And then we left the restaurant and ended up accidentally, we were both walking to the same subway station after we said goodbye. And then we just then had to get on the same subway car together after we had said goodbye outside the restaurant.
Dana, how do you not like one of the fake checks on your phone? What I like to do is pull out my phone, pretend I got a call from someone who was like, you have to go back, get back in the office, and then circle around the block.
Oh, Jennifer, if only I had known you then.
I'm sorry, we should probably keep going with other questions.
Yeah, we should keep it to the relevant things.
It's okay.
You know about Kevin Bacon, right? And the one time I had to ride a subway face to face with him and not making eye contact.
Dana, would you say you were 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon?
Everyone in this Zoom is now 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon because I met him.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything, but you do have a quote from Mary Shelley in your book.
Yeah.
How much of was she an inspiration? And is there any other women who, like Gothic women, that also inspired you within this book?
So two, I'm like looking up because I'm like, what was exactly the quote? Okay, recourse to death. Yes, Mary Shelley was a huge inspiration in 2 ways. First, Frankenstein was just like a huge influence on the book as a whole. But second, Mary Shelley allegedly lost her virginity to Percy Shelley on her mother's grave, which inspired a scene in the book of the first kiss between Hazel and Jack, which is not on a grave, but in a grave. Sorry, spoiler alert. And then another sort of inspiration was this doctor named James Barry, who I think like the language around trans historical figures isn't always, it's sometimes difficult to parse because you don't know how they identified, because I don't think the vocabulary of trans identity was available to them. But the story is that a woman who was born named Margaret Ann Buckley dressed as a man to study as a doctor, and then lived the rest of her life as a man after enrolling in medical school. And so it's difficult now retroactively to know if that was a choice of career convenience or a choice of personal identity. But the figure known now as James Barry was a real anchor to, Hazel's story.
That is all for questions that we have.
Great, we ended on a historical figure.
Yeah.
Work.
So thank you, Dana and Jennifer, and thank you for everyone that has attended the event. I have the link for Dana's book in the chat on the right-hand side if you want to purchase it. And then everyone have a good night. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Bye, everyone.